From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And ahead today, K-State's Nathan Hendricks is back, this time to talk about his projected payments to you producers from this year's Market Facilitation Program and how those would compare to payments made under last year's MFP. Then from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen will review a new decision out of the Kansas Supreme Court on whether a long-standing tenet of law, the rule against perpetuity, as it's called, should be invoked in a dispute over oil and gas rights. He says this ruling sets an important tone for future mineral rights cases. And further ahead, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with Stop, Look, and Listen. All that right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You are listening to Agriculture Today. As always, it's good to have you along with us. We're going to take another look at those payment programs that the USDA ushered out last year and this year, which are generally referred to as trade aid in response to the trade issues that have brought some economic hardship to American agriculture, particularly with respect to grains. And our guest now has just put together a detailed comparison of the Market Facilitation Program versions 1 and 2 as to the returns to Kansas farmers from these. Nathan Hendricks is with us once more. Nathan actually shared this information at that Risk and Profit conference here at Kansas State University several days back now. Just to remind us, Nathan, of the differences between trade aid in 2018 and 2019, structured differently, which will lead to different payment outcomes, it would seem.
Yeah, that's right. So the 2018 payments, commonly referred to as MFP1, those payments were paid on a per bushel of production, and then there was a specific payment rate for each commodity. And in particular, soybeans and sorghum had pretty high payment rates. And so if a farmer grew soybeans and sorghum, then they were getting that payment. But if you produced other crops, such as corn is as a prime example, only getting 1 cent per bushel, then the payment rate differed by, again, your payment depended on what kinds of crops and what your yields were on your particular farm. The payment this next year in the 2019 called MFP2, in MFP2, everybody in a county is going to get the same payment rate on planted acres. So USDA has put together a payment rate per planted acre for each county that depends on what was grown in the county, but an individual farm's payment will not depend on their own yield or their own planting mix, but what the county's payment rate is.
So those were the ground rules, and your intent here in this exercise was to compare the outcomes or the payouts of the two programs likely to come for 2019, as well as what's out for 2018, MFP 1 and 2, and to see which one is providing the greater benefit. Was that your objective?
Yeah, so just looking at how the payment rates are going to change, how much the dollar amount of these values is going to change across the country and within Kansas, and not only to look at on average within counties how the dollar amount of these payments is going to change, but also within different types of farms in the same county, how are those payments going to change from MFP1 to MFP2?
So how did you go about this analysis, and what data did you use to do so?
Yeah, so two types of analysis. One was kind of looking at the broader, at a national scale and county average changes. There we were just looking at what were the county payment rates under MFP2, and then we could go back and under MFP1, we could calculate effectively what the county payment rate was given what was planted in 2018. What were those county payment rates? What you see is big increases in average payments in the county in the southern United States, and that is cotton gets a much higher payment, and so you're getting big increases in the southern United States. And then within Kansas, you see the western part of Kansas gets the bigger increase. Overall, the average payments are increasing all over Kansas, but the bigger increase is out in western Kansas, and I think that is in particular because corn is getting a higher payment rate, and soybeans are a smaller part of the crop mix out in western Kansas, and corn's a bigger part. So that higher payment rate for corn and a big increase for sorghum as well leads to a relatively larger increase in western Kansas than eastern Kansas.
And you say that keeping in mind that for MFP1, the structure was such that the actual corn production per bushel payout, which was established less, considerably less than it was for soybeans. So that's why you see this, in part, why you see this bump in corn returns in 19 in MFP2, right?
That's right. So that change in the per commodity payment rate in particular, a bigger increase for corn leads to an especially larger increase in payment rates in certain regions, and that's especially larger in western Kansas. Soybeans also get a bit of a higher payment rate under MFP2, but again, in relative terms, not as big of an increase. And again, in general, across the United States, all the counties are on average getting larger payments under MFP2 than MFP1, but that change is bigger in certain areas, and especially western Kansas.
Now, you did, Nathan, attach a dollar figure to this improvement in overall payments from MFP1 to MFP2. What did those numbers say?
Yeah, so within Kansas, okay, and so then the second part of this analysis was just look at within Kansas, and we went into the Kansas Farm Management Association database. We had what farmers received under MFP1, and then we could take a projected, by which county the farms are in. We can calculate with their 2018 planted acres, if that's pretty similar to what 2019 planted acres will be, then we can project roughly what those payments are going to be in 2019. And we find that across KFMA farms, the average in 2018 was a payment of $37,000 per farm. And then under MFP2, it's going to increase to, on average, about $58,000 per farm.
And that revolves back to those increases largely in western Kansas?
Yeah, so the biggest increases you're going to see are in western Kansas, but eastern Kansas is on average going to get a bump as well. But it really differs of farms within a county, how big of a change it's going to be. And you will have there are going to be some farms that will get a smaller payment under MFP2 than they got under MFP1. On average, it's going to increase substantially, but there will be some farms that will get lower payments.
And you took this MFP1, MFP2 comparison in Kansas further, again using Kansas Farm Management Association data for the payments last year as well as forecasting for this year, to look at the percentage of farms that are actually receiving more than $100,000 in MFP returns, right?
Yeah, so there will be that upper tail will be larger in MFP2. So in MFP1, about 8% of farms got a payment of $100,000 or more on their farm. And under MFP2 in the 2019 payments, close to 16% of farms will get a payment of $100,000 or more.
Of course, each individual farm will differ, as is evident here. And we won't go through all of these, but you put together some examples that are in the presentation that's posted on agmanager.info, by the way, that show just how this can sway back and forth, Nathan. Yeah,
so, some simple examples. If you take, there can be a farm in western Kansas that's over 90% corn production. Well, under MFP1, they got a very small payment, and they're going to get a substantial increase in their payment under MFP2. And so that's one that'll get a big change. Another classic example is alfalfa producers who got no payment under MFP1, and they're going to get the same county payment rate as farmers that grow soybeans, corn, sorghum in the same county. So that'll make some big changes within individual farms in the same county. Another type of example is a farm that grows relatively more soybeans than the county average. And for those farms, there will be some of them that will get smaller payments under MFP2 because they were getting that soybean payment under MFP1, but then under MFP2, that just goes into the county average. And so if there's a substantial amount of corn or other crops in their county, they'll actually end up with a smaller payment under MFP2.
Of course, there are still some unknowns ahead in as far as whether MFP2 will see it through multiple tranches, as they say. Payouts for this first payout will be coming out soon, but the other two are contingent upon whether trade agreements are forged between the U.S. and China in particular. So some of this may or may not play out, but for here and now, it looks like this next go-round is generally more lucrative for Kansas farmers.
Yeah. In general, this is going to be a larger payment, especially for some farms are going to see there's a large number of farms that are going to have a 300% or more increase in their payment rate under MFP2.
Interesting. We would ask you to take a look at what Nathan has put together on this topic, his actual presentation at the Risk and Profit Conference on the comparison of Market Facilitation Program Payments 1 and 2 versions. That is at the agmanager.info website under the Risk and Profit Conference presentations. And within that, there are some handy maps of the state of Kansas for you to reference that can give you a comparative idea of where the payments last year in your county and the projected payments for this year stack up to those of neighboring counties or counties in another region of the state. Again, that's at agmanager.info under the Risk and Profit presentations. Have a look at that, and it's an interesting analysis and something that answers a few questions for our producers out there. Nathan, thanks for covering it with us right here.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Nathan Hendricks with us. Nathan, an agricultural economist, Kansas State University. And you're listening to Agriculture Today. Now this break, when we come back, our bi-weekly visit with Washburn University's Roger McEowen on another facet of agricultural law. This time, he'll remark on a fresh new decision out of the Kansas Supreme Court, which will be of interest to those of you with property featuring mineral rights. Roger's in next. This is the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and welcome back as once more we have another segment on another aspect of agricultural law, courtesy of our guest, Roger McEowen. As you know, Roger is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. We'll delve into something that's called the rule against perpetuities and a recent Kansas Supreme Court ruling that dealt with this and how it might apply to oil and gas rights. Let's get into what this rule of perpetuities is. First of all, this is what you call an ancient legal premise, you say, Roger.
Oh, it is. It dates back into the late 1600s, and it's a difficult concept. And so it's going to be tough to explain this, but we'll do our best here. It goes back into the late 1600s in England in a famous case. And what that case involved was Henry, the 22nd Earl of Arundel, created an estate plan where he wanted to pass a portion of his property to his oldest son. Now, that oldest son had a mental disability, and so after that son died, it was then to go to his second son. Now, other property would pass to his second son and then to his fourth son. So you see the shifting that's going on from generation to generation. And his estate plan also contained provisions for shifting property many generations later if certain conditions should occur. Well, what happened was when Henry's second son succeeded to his older brother's property, he didn't want the property to pass to his younger brother. So the younger brother sued to enforce his interest as created under their father's estate plan. So that got into the court system in England, and the House of Lords held that the shifting condition that Dad's estate plan created could not have an indefinite existence because we don't know how long people are going to live. We don't know how long this is going to take until the shifting condition comes into being. So it's theoretically perpetual. And the court said, look, you can't tie up the ability to transfer real estate for too long a period of time beyond the lives of the persons that were alive at the time of the initial transfer. Now, they didn't tell us how long was too long a time. They just said, well, what he's doing here in this estate plan, it's tying up the eventual sale of that land because it's subject to another condition. After this person dies, then it's going to shift to this person, then later on it's going to shift back to somebody else. So you can't really sell it to an outside party because of these shifting conditions. So we didn't know how long was too long after the lives in being. The court just said, well, for everybody that's alive when Dad created this, there is some type of a time frame that we need to set in terms of when these interests need to vest or come to fruition, so I have full ownership. But they didn't tell us that for another 150 years in terms of how long was too long, and that's when they said the end of all the lives in being at the time of the transfer plus another 21 years. Everything has to vest. All those conditions have to take place in that time, or the transfer is invalid. They're going to wipe it out. So that wasn't until 1833. And that rule out of that case, dating back to 1682, carried over into the United States. And we deal with that to this day.
And it is applicable to any number of agricultural situations as, say, the farm is passed along down the line.
Yeah, it does come up, sometimes inadvertently, but sometimes by plan in agricultural settings because we want to keep land in the family, and so we have these conditions on the transfer of the property, and planners have to be aware of what the rule against perpetuities is in their particular state. Now, it's not lives in being plus 21 years in every state. That's the common law application. States such as Kansas have the uniform statutory rule against perpetuity, which is a little bit different than that. 10 states have entirely repealed the rule, such as South Dakota and some other states. So it's been a contentious issue across the country.
Well, let's talk of this recent court case here in Kansas. It was decided by the Kansas Supreme Court in mid-August, and this involved oil and gas royalties. What were the details, Roger?
Yeah, this is a big deal, and there are literally, as I explain this, and I'll go through the actual language of what was created in the deed involving this farmland. There are literally thousands of these interests all across Kansas. What it is known technically is as a defeasible term mineral interest. And what that is we call it a durational estate. So it's an estate in land for a period of time that involves a mineral royalty or non-executive mineral interest for a fixed term of years and then for an indefinite period of time thereafter, usually so long as oil or gas is produced. And that's what was at issue in the case. So what happened factually was in late 1967, you had an individual that executed 2 deeds conveying tracts of real estate in the same section of the county. The east half of the section was conveyed to one grantee, and the quarter of a section was conveyed to another grantee. Both deeds said, quote, except and subject to. So, Eric, for example, I'm transferring my property to you, and I put a clause in the deed that says you get my property, except and subject to me saving and accepting all oil, gas, and other minerals in and under, or that may be produced from the land for a period of 20 years, or as long thereafter as oil and or gas or other minerals might be produced therefrom and thereunder. That was the clause language that was used in the case. So if I'm selling you my farm, I'm reserving a mineral interest. Right. So in the case, the grantor died a few years later in the early 1970s, and the local probate court here in Kansas distributed set percentages of the residue of his estate, including the reserved mineral interest, to his descendants. Well, that 20-year term, remember, he reserved the mineral interest for 20 years and then for however long thereafter, as long as there's production. Well, that 20-year term expired on December 30th, 1987. And from that time until May 31 of 2017, so another 30 years, there was no drilling activity on either tract. There was no gas, no mineral production. And so in 2016, the plaintiff, which is an oil company, sued to quiet title to the tracts involved. They claimed that they were the ones that held valid and subsisting oil and gas leases. Well, the heirs are saying here, well, we own an interest in the minerals under our ancestors' will, and we own a fee simple, what's known as a fee simple determinable in the mineral rights, and therefore we were given those under our ancestors' estate plan. And then you had another set of heirs that claimed, no, those mineral interests on the other side of the family, those were subject to and then invalidated by the perpetuities rule.
Well, this is obviously considerably involved here. How did the trial court rule on this, whether the oil and gas operation did have an inherent right to those royalties, or did the other party, the family, have a stake in that?
Well, the trial court said that the rule against perpetuities didn't apply, but they did so in kind of a weird way. They said that the reserved right in the ancestor here had not actually alienated the surface and the mineral interests of the tract. This goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed with the trial court on that basic point, that the rule against perpetuities didn't apply, but for a different reason, and this is the key. As I said earlier, there are literally thousands of these interests in Kansas. That language that I quoted earlier is used in many, thousands of oil and gas leases and grants to land, transfers to land, where you're reserving the mineral interest. The Supreme Court of Kansas said that we're still not going to apply the rule against perpetuities because they said that would actually be counterproductive to the purpose behind the rule, which is to make sure that land is what we call freely alienable, that we can convey it, we can sell it, and that the rule would create, as they said in this instance, chaos. It would actually operate against the overall purpose of the rule. So they said when a grantor leaves a future interest in an ascertainable person, somebody we know, we can identify them, then the future interest in the minerals is not subject to the rule against perpetuity. So they said the rule doesn't apply because the interest vested during a lifetime but reverted back to the surface estate because of the lack of production. They said that's okay. To me, that's a big sigh of relief for these interests in Kansas. These are so prevalent in oil and gas properties in the state of Kansas, and had the rule applied, that would have invalidated the grantee's interest in this. And the court said, we're going to follow kind of a policy reason here, and we're not going to apply the rule.
And just as a finer point, you note that this sort of decision is rather uncommon, and this ruling in Kansas is one of just a handful of similar rulings. Is that right?
Yeah, the court largely followed a Texas case that came down a couple of years ago. But Kansas had never followed this approach and had applied the rule against perpetuities with respect to mineral interests rather strictly for many, many years and decades. And so this is a backing off of the strict application of the rule to recognize what actually happens in the industry in terms of the way interests in minerals are conveyed. So from that standpoint, I think it's a real good application of the rule. What they said was we're going to follow the basic policy behind the rule, not the strict application, when the application would violate the policy.
This definitely has relevance to a lot of folks out there. You can read up more on this recent court decision, again taking place in mid-August by the Kansas Supreme Court, on Roger's blog at this website, washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Roger, thanks for covering a detailed matter with us today. We always appreciate your time and your input.
Thank you, Eric.
That's Roger McEowen. Roger is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, and he's with us every other week here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans and more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and continuing on now with today's agricultural news headlines. These courtesy in part of DTN. Well, because of the Labor Day holiday, the USDA's Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report was delayed for a day. Here's how it reads for the week ending this past Sunday. The topsoil moisture supplies in Kansas, 13% surplus, 71% adequate, and 16% short to very short, while subsoil moisture at 8% surplus, 76% adequate, and 16% short to very short. The condition of the Kansas corn crop this week, 50% good to excellent, 34% fair, and 16% poor to very poor. Corn in the dense stage now at 65%, the average for the date 72%, and corn now mature at 16%, that's behind the average of 26%. The soybean crop in Kansas, 53% good to excellent, 36% fair, and 11% poor to very poor. Soybeans now setting pods at 83%, that's behind the 89% average, and soybeans dropping leaves at 3%, that's very near the average. As for the grain sorghum crop in the state then, 62% good to excellent, 29% fair, and 9% poor to very poor. Sorghum coloring now at 39%, that's behind the average of 50% for the date, and sorghum mature now at 1%, that's very near the average, according to the USDA in its weekly Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report. As of yesterday, you producers can now enroll in the Agriculture Risk Coverage, or ARC, or Price Loss Coverage, or PLC, programs for the 2020 crop year. Enrollment for the two programs will be open through March the 15th of next year. If no election is made by that deadline, it will default to the current elections of the crops on the farm established under the 2014 Farm Bill, according to the USDA. Under the changes introduced by the 18 Farm Bill, you producers may enroll and elect program year 2019 coverage in crop-by-crop ARC County or PLC or ARC Individual for the entire farm. The 2019 election will apply for both the 19 and 20 crop years. You'll then have an opportunity to change your program elections in crop years 21 through 23. Once 2019 crop year elections are completed, you producers can then submit an enrollment contract for the 2020 crop year beginning on October the 7th and ending June the 30th of 2020. Incidentally, the ARC and PLC program options remain the primary topics at those K-State 2018 Farm Bill meetings, and there are two left on the schedule. The next one is, in fact, tomorrow. That'll take place in northeast Kansas at Seneca at the Nemaha County Community Center starting at 1:30 in the afternoon. And then the final in the series will be next Tuesday, September the 10th, at Concordia at the commercial building at the Cloud County Fairgrounds. For more information on those meetings and to register at this late date, you can still do so, but contact the respective extension offices in Nemaha or Cloud counties right away. China is challenging the latest round of U.S. tariffs targeting $110 billion in Chinese goods that took effect over the weekend, this in a new complaint filed at the World Trade Organization. The U.S. asserting that the duties, which it imposed over alleged Chinese theft of U.S. intellectual property, are not subject to review by the WTO, but China has repeatedly rejected that assertion. In a statement, the Chinese Commerce Ministry said the U.S. reneged on an agreement not to impose new tariffs that was reached at the June G20 summit in Japan. That in turn prompted China to lodge the complaint at WTO, according to the ministry. The U.S. and China have 60 days to resolve the dispute. If they're unable to reach a mutually agreed solution, China could then request the establishment of a WTO dispute panel to adjudicate the matter. Meantime, China is importing fewer U.S. soybeans, and that is opening up an opportunity for Argentina to sell more soybean meal to China. A delegation from the Rosario Board of Trade in Argentina, that's the country's largest soy port, is visiting China to promote its soybean and soy meal products. Another Argentine delegation is scheduled to follow up with another visit this month to speed up the progress. At the same time, a Chinese delegation is currently visiting Argentina crushing plants to work on the process of checking the quality of soy meal for export to China. That is the last step before the Chinese government can approve imports of Argentine soy meal. After a year of severe drought, Argentina's soybean production for 18-19 rebounded 48% from a year earlier, producing over 55 million metric tons. The crushing volume in soy meal exports also increasing. Quoting Hernan Viola, Argentina's agricultural attaché in Beijing, we will see a volume of more than 26 million tons of soy meal exported in this year. Viola added, as the world's largest soy meal exporter, Argentina needs to open up that China market. Well, the beef checkoff is helping put accurate information about beef in the hands of younger audiences. Sam Capone tells us here one program enhances the ability of teachers to provide hands-on experiences with beef.
The Kansas Beef Council's Beef Certificate Program offers beef education resources to Kansas high school and middle school family and consumer science classes and teaching labs. Schools are reimbursed for the purchase of beef used in classroom lessons about lean beef selection, storage, preparation, food safety, and nutrition. Kansas teachers are encouraged to apply for this checkoff-funded program. 103 Kansas schools and middle schools from 37 counties applied for the Beef Certificate Program during the past school year. Teachers reported 15,728 family and consumer science students were reached with the average cost per student at $1.40. Schools applying last year were provided teacher resource kits that included a copy of the video True Beef. The documentary features agricultural science and culinary arts students as they learn about the entire beef production process. It is designed to teach culinary arts students where their food comes from while learning the importance of farming and ranching from agricultural students. The documentary is accompanied by 8 lesson plans ready for use in the classroom. Middle school and high school teachers are a trusted source of information from the Generation Y audience. Providing these thought leaders easy-to-use lesson plans and resources helps deliver accurate information about beef production. I'm Sam Capone.
And that is a look at today's agricultural news headlines. You are tuned to Agriculture Today. The high waters this spring and summer along our rivers and streams have eroded some of our soil and our material away from those waterways. Gus Vanderhoeven, in the wake of that, made a discovery, and he'll tell us about it next. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
When you see that narrow stream of fast-flowing clear water, it's hard to believe that debris is hanging 10 feet high.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Last Tuesday was a beautiful, crisp morning after a cloudy day. I decided to make an early morning farm run while it was still cool and the grass was wet. It was the time of day that one easily sees the spiderwebs hanging across the trail. The fine droplets on the intricate web are easy to see. On the way out to the farm, I met John, my road grader friend. I briefly stopped, and as he opened the door of the grader, I asked him if he could give Bennett Road a quick grade. We need to get the cattle off, and the semi needs to pull in there. Presently it's pretty rough. Of course, all county roads need grading, and Bennett Road is not on the top of the list. Also, a quick grading job does not work for John. He is a perfectionist, and he wants to make roads good. However, the rains we had this summer made grading roads a tough job. I was glad to see him. On the farm, I parked the truck to go on foot. Farm roads also need attention. When I walked down into McIntyre Creek, I easily stepped across the fast-flowing trickle. When you see that narrow stream of fast-flowing water, clear water, it's hard to believe the debris is hanging 10 feet high, and that whole trees are toppling into the creek and are coming down, partly blocking the flow. It was with that on my mind that I changed my mind while standing in the bottom of the creek on top of good gravel. I slowly walked upstream, keeping my eyes on the ground and along the side on the banks. The morning light fell through the trees and played on the water. Every now and then, the flow had created a large pool, a perfect little swimming hole if one was looking for a cooling-off spot. But the morning was not hot, and I was walking in the shade. When I reached a gentle corner in the creek, I carefully studied the bare bank. The bank, mostly dark earth with traces of layers of gravel, was roughly 13 feet high. It's the outbow of the creek, so it is slowly eating away the good land. The good land is presently a brome hay meadow. Years ago, I planted trees on the bank there, but they never grew big as the creek has undercut the bank and they toppled in. I know I should have graded the bank down and done away with its steepness. I know. But I only have so much land, and slope takes away from good land. It's an interesting problem. And don't forget what I said earlier, whole trees are coming down. It will be something when they hit the bridge. I can see a problem, a big problem. But standing there in the bend of the stream and studying the steep earthen bank, something caught my eye. I've always studied the banks as I walk the creek, and I know there is stuff there to be discovered. Further upstream, there's the frame of an old car just sticking out. Old iron floats down all the time. How many farms were there upstream? But what I saw last week was different. It looked like bleached bone, and it was bleached bone. And what made it interesting was that it was sticking out about 5 feet from the bottom of the creek and about 8 feet from the top. It was deeply buried, and I could not pull it out. I would have to come back with a digging tool. It was not a big piece of bone, but 2 sides totally symmetrical, a right and left wing, bleached. I mentally marked the location and walked on. I found a bended short piece of flat iron. It was rusted, but would be perfect to use for digging out my bone. So back I went. I carefully removed the damp earth from around the bone, maybe to a paleontologist not carefully enough. I finished up with a large clump of sticky soil in my hand with a bone inside. I squatted down near the flowing water and slowly washed what I had unearthed. I felt rich. I don't know what I felt. As mud fell away, I recognized it as an vertebrae, A big vertebrae with the clear holes where nerves had passed. At the widest part, it would be 6 inches. I've seen plenty of vertebrae of cows, but this was bigger. My guess, it is from a long-dead buffalo. Size and location make me think that. It was laying a good 8 feet down from the surface, fully embedded, and brought to the open by the creek erosion which caused the exposed part to bleach. Of course, there were buffalo on that land, as I've several old wallows on top of the hills. But buffalo had to come down to drink. And wherever the old buffalo died, the one vertebrae may have rolled and washed down a long time ago. But as time goes by, I may find more boned parts slowly being exposed in the steep bank there. From now on, I will keep a close eye on that spot. All that time, that bone was buried. I found it, and I feel lucky and thankful.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. And with that, our Wednesday edition comes to a close as always. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.